these mandatory arbitration clauses from being in all these contracts.
Susan, why don't you introduce the man sitting next to you?
This is Judge Oliver Diaz. Judge Diaz actually was a justice of the Mississippi State Supreme Court until he was targeted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for defeat because he wasn't corporate enough.
Okay, Judge Diaz, tell us your story and what happened.
Well, I think people are very familiar with elections in America, and for years you've had corporations donating to the executive branch, presidents and governors, the legislative branch, your House of Representatives and Senate. You've had massive amounts of funding, and people expect that when you have elections. The judiciary, the judicial branch of government, has been separate from that for years and years. But what we've seen lately are these corporations coming in, putting money into judicial races, and they're promoting candidates who tend to support corporate interests rather than a fair, level playing field for average persons. They're actually putting money into the system in order to get people serving on the bench who would rule in the best interests of corporations rather than a fair judiciary.
So talk about exactly what happened to you. You were running for your position,
right,
judge.
Right.
Who was your opponent?
Well, in Mississippi, Supreme Court elections Supreme Court races are by popular election. I was appointed by the governor when there was a vacancy on the court, and then had to stand for election. Folks had a chance to observe my judicial record, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce decided that they could get a better candidate for their interest rather than me. And they came into Mississippi at a time when this had never been done before and put millions of dollars into the election against me to support my opponent. It's sort of, if you're familiar with the Citizens United case at the U.S. Supreme Court recently, corporations were able to contribute massive amounts of money without having to disclose where those funds come from or even how much money they put into the races in Mississippi. And so I was faced with having to run an election with massive amounts of money coming in against me and having to raise the resources on my own to
Yeah, you did have to disclose who gave you money.
I had to disclose every single penny that I raised. I had to disclose who I raised it from, how I spent it. Yet corporations are able to come in and not have to disclose where their money comes from or how they spend it. Yeah, it's really a disadvantage for candidates. And it's going to start happening all across the country. This is not unique to Mississippi. This is the trend that's going to happen across the United States.
Yet you won.
I won. I did win my first election.
Though, as your wife says in the film, what was perhaps one of the happiest days in your lives turned out to be one of the most catastrophic in the end.
Exactly. We were able to prevail. Actually, it was a very close election, and it went into a runoff. There were 3 candidates, and we were in the top 2, and we had to face a runoff. We ran for in the election, which was 3 weeks after the general election, and were able to win in the runoff. But after the election, the U.S. attorney who was appointed by George Bush was a Republican congressman, a guy who got defeated for Congress, and George Bush put him in for a U.S. attorney. He then began to investigate Democratic donors to judicial races in Mississippi and began a prosecution of me at that time, a prosecution based upon my campaign contributions.
And indicted you.
And indicted, yes. I was indicted for bribery, actually, based upon the campaign contributions, because I had to disclose my campaign contributions. They were able to see who donated. They looked at my largest contributor, which was a very good friend of mine named Paul Miner. He was actually a major Democratic donor across the United States. He was one of John Edwards' largest contributors at the time. And they began to investigate. He
co-signed a loan that you needed to take out to challenge the millions that your opponent was getting.
Exactly. We weren't able to raise enough to combat these millions that were coming in, and so we took out a loan from the bank. Mr. Miner co-signed that loan for my campaign. Because he was such a good friend of mine, I never voted on a single case that he had before the Mississippi Supreme Court or me while I was on the bench. Yet we were being investigated for bribery. I thought it would be an open and shut case. I said, there's no way they could even pursue this. They're going to look at the record, and they're going to see that I've never even voted on his cases.
But this took you off the bench.
Took me off the bench for over 3 years.
And who replaced you?
Well, had to stand for election again, and again the chamber came in, put massive amounts of money against me, and I was defeated in the second election because of well, you could imagine the publicity that I'd received while I was on the bench, and it was very difficult to overcome that.
What happened in the trial?
I was completely acquitted in the trial. The jury found me not guilty of everything.
How long was the trial?
The trial lasted about 3 months.
How long was the jury deliberation?
The jury deliberation in the first trial, it lasted for a little while. We were completely acquitted. 3 days after I was acquitted, I was re-indicted again. The federal prosecutor said, well, if it's not bribery or campaign finance laws, he must have not properly disclosed this on his income, so we're gonna indict him for income tax evasion now. I was tried again, completely acquitted. Jury was out for about 15 minutes and found me not guilty of everything again.
But you lost the race.
But did lose the race in the second time, yes.
Did your opponent, the original opponent, end up in your seat?
The original opponent, actually, I think he probably fared a little better. After I defeated him in the election, George Bush nominated him for a federal judgeship, and he's now serving as a federal judge.
Did Karl Rove play any role in this? Because we have followed the case of the former Alabama governor, Don Siegelman,
yes,
who went to jail, and Rove played a key role.
Yes. You would be surprised at the similarities in the cases. We've since learned that this is sort of the MO that the Rove and his machine actually used. They came into the state of Texas and took over the Supreme Court there. Alabama, they did the same thing, and they used that as a launching pad to sort of pick off state Supreme Court justices all around the country using that model.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us. People can learn more about this case by seeing the film Hot Coffee that has premiered here at Sundance. 30 seconds, Susan Saladoff, before we go to break and come back to the last family that you focus on. Very painful story of medical malpractice, and the whole family will join us. But what you hope to accomplish in this film?
Well, I want this film to get out to a general public so that people can at least have their minds opened to another side of this story of our civil justice system, so that they can vote intelligently, so that they can talk about it intelligently. I want the truth to finally come out, so that hopefully people can protect their civil rights and protect their access to the courts.
Well, former Judge Oliver Diaz and Susan Saladoff, first-time filmmaker with this remarkable film, Hot Coffee. You can go to hotcoffeethemovie.com. This is Democracy Now!